All right, so hello everyone. Thank you for attending, for coming. Thank you to our panelists for being here, and welcome to the Teaching and Learning Center Changemaker Fellows panel discussion. So we're here today for about an hour of really fantastic conversation already. Just before the event started, we were warming up. I'm Audra Buck-Coleman. I'm the Associate Director of the Changemaker Institute, and we are delighted to be in partnership with the Teaching and Learning Commons in support of the Changemaker Faculty Fellows, which the Teaching Learning Commons does such a phenomenal just phenomenal job with. So for today, we have our panel, or we have our four panelists led by Tricia Taylor Oliveira. She's the Director of Academic Internship Program in the Teaching and Learning Commons. I'm going to be turning it over to her in just a minute. But so our format is we've got some prepared questions for our panelists that Tricia will ask. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Also, just stay muted. Again, we are recording this event, so if you'd rather not be recorded, go ahead and turn your video off, or just choose how you want to do that. And we plan to post the video on the Changemaker Institute, just to give a refresher of what's some great new work that's coming out of these community engagement learning communities. So just in terms of how we plan to use that. So put questions in the chat. We'll most likely get to those at the end of the session, but please go ahead and let us know what questions you have. And without further ado, let me give you the definition of change making, which is intentional activity that leads us to a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world. And so that is the framework for these fellows in terms of thinking about community engagement. And so I will turn it over to Tricia and let her take it away.
All right, thanks, Audra. And I want to say thanks to our panelists for being here today. Before we dive into our conversation, just want to share a little bit of context about the fellowship that we're talking about today. So the Teaching and Learning Commons Community Engaged Learning Changemaker Faculty Fellowship, it's a mouthful, is really the result of collaborative effort coming out of work from the Teaching and Learning Commons engaged teaching team, as well as experiential learning team, together with colleagues. Well, there's been some movement in roles, but with our colleague who is now with the Changemaker Institute, was instrumental to developing the program and the faculty development area as well on campus. And so this really arose as a desire to elevate the work of faculty who are doing community engaged learning, to create resources and community among these folks and opportunities to further develop leadership and visibility for this incredible work. So we're really excited for you to have the chance to hear about the incredible projects that folks are working on. The fellowship itself is a year-long faculty development program that centers around, there's a learning community, a faculty learning community that meets regularly to share with one another, support each other, dive into pedagogy around community engaged learning as well, and develop relationships across campus to build up that leadership and infrastructure for our community engagement here on campus. It does have a financial award of up to $10,000 for the coming year. It will be up to $10,000 for fellows, which can be an individual or a team of folks working on a community engaged project that relates to either an existing course or a course, a new course being developed that does that community engagement. And we're really focused as well on wanting to honor the role of our community partners as co-educators through this program as well. We're looking forward to our applications opening up next week for the upcoming cohort. And for the 2023 to 2024 year. And this will be our 4th cohort. So we're excited to keep the program growing and keep growing this community. So with that, I want to dive into giving you the chance to hear from our faculty fellows. And would like to start just by asking each of you all. So today we have with us Amy Lerner from the Urban Studies and Planning Department, Amy Porter from Theater and Dance, Matthew Herbst from Making of the Modern World in Eleanor Roosevelt College, and Maziar Ghazinejad from Mechanical and Aeronautical Engineering, MAE department. So to begin, I'd like to ask each of you if you can share a bit about each of your projects. And Amy, can I ask you to begin?
I think you also called Lisa Amy, so I think you're referring to me. There's a lot of Amy's around. It was very popular in the 70s and 80s. My project is to design a sustainable food systems course. And that will be offered next spring, next quarter. And the idea with this course is that students are really doing a lot of hands-on learning, including cooking, harvesting, visiting different community garden spaces, and other kinds of organizations that are working with food insecurity across San Diego. So that's what my project has been focused on. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, Lisa and Matthew, would you like to share a little bit about your project as well?
Okay, I'm getting the eye from Matthew to start. So yes, our project, the formal title was Disability, Inclusion, and Advocacy, Connecting with the Arts and Community. So we were specifically working around addressing how spaces can be more inclusive and less ableist, and neurodiversity in particular can be part of the spaces that we all work in. And I'm in theater and dance. And so Matthew and I, when we partner, we have this great fusion of like his amazing expertise in history. And then I was really looking at representation and a lot of different areas that the arts get this agency to dive into that are, that are really creative and exploratory. And when we go into a little more detail, we can talk about some of the people we were able to access, because we actually had some funding to say, like, come to this course. So in spring of 21, we taught a Cat 3 course that this fellowship enabled us to prepare, and also to, like I said, really invite some amazing folks who, because when we were in the Zoom space and asynchronous, we could say, we're not even asking you to travel. You can just sign in and have a session with us. And that part of it was really exciting. Matthew, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. So we taught this. The idea was really to raise awareness, and it's remarkable how little students know often, about disability history, about disability issues. So through a general education forum like the CAT, Culture, Art, and Technology in Sixth College, we're able to teach 250 students, introduce them to this topic. And it's really quite remarkable how they responded. So as Lisa said, we had Judy Heumann spoke to us, one of the co-founders of the World Institute on Disability. We had Jim Lebrecht, co-producer of Crip Camp, and of course he's in Crip Camp, who's an alum of Theater and Dance Department at UCSD. So it was quite a nice connection there. And then that led to a global seminar. So after spring 2021, with one of the partners, which is Camp Hill Community, which is in Santa Cruz, which is part of a global network of disability inclusive communities, we led a global seminar where we brought students to an immersive experience with Camp Hill and Santa Cruz. And then we had another partner called Common Roots Farm. And so we're looking at housing. How do you develop housing and creating housing that is inclusive for people with intellectual and physical disabilities? So that took place in summer 2022. And then fall 2023, we had a conference. We participated in a conference with Camp Hill, kind of this national conference they have about their communities. And so we were able to take part in that. And again, it's all part of this ongoing work. And then Lisa and I are going to co-teach a course again in spring 2024, and then there'll be a return to Santa Cruz in summer 2024. So the work continues, and Lisa there's a lot of other work that Lisa hasn't mentioned that is part of this that I think she'll talk about afterwards.
Maziar, you want to tell us a bit about your project?
Sure. Just a small correction. My department is mechanical and aerospace engineering, which is pretty close. The project that I was working on, and we are still working on, is Design for Launch, and this is an outreach project to K-12 education, particularly San Diego Unified District. We work with the physics teacher to develop a program to teach students, mostly in Title I schools in the districts that we have around us, to design different type of payload for a space launch, basically. If, for example, anybody has any experiment that they want to do in ISS, International Space Station, that payload needs to be designed in a way that it can tolerate the entire launch forces. And the teachers and consequently the students are designing different payload structures. They're going to 3D print it. We just wanted to make sure that our community partners' demands, for example, one of the most prototyping has been met. And then they're going to test it first aesthetically by just putting the weight on it. And finally, we made a research instrument over the last few years, mostly for work on the effect of the launch on the human organoid in collaboration with Clark Center for Human Imagination and the Stem Cell Institute at UCSD. And we use that also for education. So right now, the students, after they're done with the design, they're going to put it in the centrifuge launch simulator. And we'll see that if their design is going to endure the launch, basically. So we wanted to involve elements of more attractive, like space sciences, prototyping, in particular 3D printing here, and engineering design. And we want to make it more appealing and approachable for high school students. And this was part of that outreach.
Right. Well, thanks so much. I'd love to, I want to ask also if you can share a little bit about what motivated you to focus on community engaged learning. Those of you who engage in this kind of work know it can be intensive work. It takes some additional commitment and time and effort to make these projects happen. So what motivated you to want to work community engaged learning into your courses and projects? And also, if you could maybe say a little bit about how that connects, how your projects are connected to change making with that community engaged piece. Let's see, Maziar, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. There are different areas of motivation that we had here. One of them is we usually felt that the STEM, particularly engineering, the way that it's being portrayed and being lectured is very dry, and it doesn't capture the real spirit of engineering and generally STEM. And we always thought about how we can make this more appealing, more approachable for the people, so they don't think this is going to be completely from different world and it's not really approachable. Particularly because we needed more participation in STEM from the Title I schools around us. And generally we need people with more interest and more background. And we figured that rather than just thinking about, okay, the schools are not up to this, etc., we're going to reach out to schools and particularly the science coordinator and talk to them and ask them what we can do to increase the level of interest in these physics courses. And this was basically the precursor. Over time, we figured out what we can do to make the physics courses in high school more appealing. And finally, we get a better engineering students or more interested in engineering students. And this was the main motivation. Down the road, a lot of different things happened. We figured out, okay, a lot of the students are interested in the new prototyping method, like 3D printing. There is a huge interest in our research area, a space-oriented science and technology. We used elements of that. And it has started to become basically a very mutual relation that we have with the school district in San Diego, particularly with the STEM. I can slice it deeper if there are more questions, but I will turn it over to my colleagues here.
Feel free to jump in, Amy or Matthew or Lisa. You want to add?
Well, so I'm relatively new to UCSD, and I have never taught a food systems course before, but my research and my personal life and my passions really surround different issues of food systems, of landscape change. And I've done a lot of community engaged and experiential learning outside of universities. And so I started this was actually after I got hired. When I saw this opportunity, I thought, wow, I've never actually seen funding like this at I've been at a lot of universities as a student, as a postdoc, as faculty. I've never seen this kind of opportunity to design a learning experience that's focused on experiential engagement and community-based learning. And I was like, this is my chance to put it all together into this kind of a course that doesn't seem to exist here. There seems to be a lot of interest. I touch on these topics in all of my other classes, and the students, they're just like, we want so much more about food and food systems. And it just touches everyone's souls because we all love eating and it's so much a part of our lives. And we also have a lot of concerns about our food systems, and they just like, they're dying for it. So I was really excited to put everything together for this kind of a course. And even myself as a student and in my experiences in education, there's nothing like experiential learning, and there's nothing like really being connected to our wider community. I mean, universities are notoriously ivory towers and in our bubbles. That's still also the case at UCSD and most other universities, really. But I think universities are starting to become a little more reflective about that, and reflexive, and thinking about how to shift a bit the priorities in the university in terms of their educational and curricular priorities. I mean, we can think about the new 8th College that I'm sure everyone here knows about, to reach outside in a respectful way. And it's very hard to do that. One of the challenges, well, that's another question, but one of the challenges for me just arriving is, how do I choose a community partner? I'm not going to parachute into an NGO and say, hi, I just arrived to UCSD, help me with this course, let's do something together. So really the main community for my project is campus. And I'm now working with housing and dining, I'm working with real estate, I'm on a sustainable food committee. So this course is like also created an entire world that I'm operating in now, on and off campus, but a lot of on campus too, about food sustainability on campus, and allowing the students to be part of that, and empowering them to be part of that, and making change for the system around them. So for change making, for me, it's a really direct link. We have the ear of real estate and housing and dining, and we can actually instill change that they can feel and touch and see and experience around them in their campus community. And I think that's really powerful to show them that it's possible to do that, even just in a 1-quarter course.
And then for us, well, where to begin with that is, this is all about relationship building and how important that is. And so, and for our campus, from our perspective, our campus has a long way to go in terms of creating inclusive space for students with disabilities, for people with disabilities, and starts with the fact that our diversity, equity, and inclusion requirement excludes disability. If you teach a course on history of disability in the US, it doesn't count, because it doesn't, disability is not deemed a worthy category of inclusion based on the DEI requirement, which again is ableism right there as a protocol. So Lisa and I have been working together as faculty on the Office of Students with Disabilities Faculty Advisory Committee for, advisory board for however long we've been doing that. And that OSD really is looking at, the legal requirements for a accommodations. It's not providing a space where we're viewing disability as an expression of diversity that should be, for those students that want to bond through this, creating that space. OSD is not tasked with that. And so where Lisa and I, we're committed to this, we work in this area. And in 2013, I took a group of ERC students to Istanbul to work. It was an intercultural disability program that I took them. I taught a course in the winter, took the students to Istanbul, got funding. It was a wonderful experience with partners in Istanbul in the disability schools over there. And the students had a great experience, but that's where I realized I sort of had hit my threshold of understanding that there was an embodied component. I'm a historian. And so it was like, I knew I needed help. I needed someone that had this expertise that I just didn't have. And Lisa and I had been on committees at this committee, but as you know, working on committees, often the committee is you go in, you do the work of the committee and you're scattered. You sort of know a face, but you don't really know the person. So I reached out to Lisa, and I remember the tagline. It was dance, Istanbul, and disability. I think it was something like this. And it turns out, which I didn't know, all three of those were right up in Lisa's wheelhouse and things that really mattered. So Lisa then we partnered together to teach the course in 2014. And then we took the students to Istanbul, and it was one of the greatest experiences I've had as a faculty member. So that's where we began to work together and to partner. But then Lisa has a much richer experience. So Lisa, let me pass the baton to you because you could share more about what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. I'll say, I mean, for context, that theater and dance, there's a reason actually they're building 8th College right out my window right now, which has its pluses and minuses. But the theme of community and the dorm is the Theater and Dance Living and Learning Center. And everything we do in theater and dance is embodied and based in the community, because we're always welcoming an audience in to see our productions. So come see a play if you haven't. We have 5 or 6 theaters over here we share with La Jolla Playhouse, and they're first and foremost UCSD spaces. So I think for me, everything I do, I think about experientially, and also just the act of making art that ultimately does invite the community in to witness, to share, to build relationships with, has been a part of my research profile for my whole career. So when Matthew and I had the opportunity to build on what we've done in Istanbul, even though a number of years had passed, I was much more versed in a lot of what's going on in the advocacy community and the arts, and we were really able to take all of that and think about, what does it mean to share with these students that they can really make a difference. And even now, I get feedback. I get an email once in a while, and a student who took this class in spring of 21 will say, like, I never walk into a building without thinking of someone who's a wheelchair user also being able to get into that building. And I never even thought about that before. So I think what we found is that we were really touching people who maybe didn't have a personal connection with disability, and they're really thinking about, well, how can they extend themselves into the community, starting on campus, of course, and then resonating out. I will say one of the hard things for me, I know we haven't gotten to the challenge question, but was we had to do it all asynchronously, and Matthew's really well versed at that. And for me, that was very difficult. A lot of what I do is about somatics and the sensory system and improvisation and building teams and groups. So I'm really eager for the opportunity to be able to have some more direct contact with the students when we teach the class again. And then in the theater community in San Diego, I work with different theaters like the Old Globe, Signet, San Diego Rep, which sadly is no longer, La Jolla Playhouse, in adapting a performance. So it's either called sensory sensitive, sensory friendly, so that it's welcoming to communities who can't just like sit still and be quiet and watch theater, dance, music, opera. And that work has gone on for more than a decade. And that's something I initiated with the Old Globe, with their Grinch oriented Christmas show. So so for me, it's been an opportunity, the Changemaker experience, to really bring together a lot of different aspects of my work, and also to feel very resourced, not just with the funding, but with the community, because it's very hard on this campus to meet faculty from other departments, I find. So it was really nice to be able to connect with a lot of other colleagues whose research I don't know anything about, and I would learn something new every time we came together.
Thanks for that. I would like to dive in a little bit to thinking about, and Maziar, I think you started touching on this a bit with the schools, and I heard it a bit also with Matthew and Lisa's project. Can you say a little bit about the relationships with the community partners and how you developed and grew those relationships, and some of the role that they played in the work that you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. One of the great things that, because as you remember, I even reached out to you that how we can actually, what would be our entry, and a lot of people in the Changemaker Institute at that time, because I wanted to work with the district. And I think one of, it was your advice, Tricia, and another person that also talked to Create, because they're really good at their connection. So we work with Create at UCSD, which is a great institute here. And they introduced us to the STEM coordinator for the district. Basically, there are teachers and the coordinators that are working on a different capacity with a lot of different schools, including Title I schools, which was our main target. And very soon we got connected with them, and we sat through a number of sessions with teachers and the coordinators on what would be helpful for them. Because one of the things that they mentioned is a lot of time when faculty try to help us, not necessarily from UCSD, from anywhere, they have their own kind of idea of how they can help, and then to try to go with that. And sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm more generous, actually. They said a lot of time it doesn't. In the long term, it's going to work. So we decided that we need to really listen to the physics teacher and the coordinator and what we can do to help the students. So rather than going for the students, we thought, actually, let's work with the teachers, and teachers going to work with the students on this program, the modules that we try to create for the space-oriented STEM, and making it appealing for in this particular case, 7 to 12 students. And so that actually put us in the right direction, but not in one session, in a number of the sessions. It's been more than a year that we are having meeting with them, at least maybe 3 times a quarter, sometimes a number of times in a month, right? Even today, I had a meeting with them right before this meeting to talk about how we can shave the edges for the program that is coming up for the physics teacher in February 9 to 10. And they taught us about the limitation they have, the particular parts that they can use help. They put us in a direction that, okay, if you want to help us with the engineering and design, maybe we should go, for example, for a condition of prototyping. That's going to make it really interesting for the students, get their interest up. And we just listened and took note and worked with Create. And eventually we designed it based, particularly, I would say they designed it based on what we offered. And eventually this becomes something that they say, okay, now this could be enduring, because we can get the first iteration, get a feedback, and go back and forth. It taught me a lot about the districts in the city, in San Diego in particular. I think it could be generalized to other parts of the country as well. What would be the field that I'm working in, and how I can make it more accessible for particularly under-resourced school, and how the approach should be adaptable to what teachers are going to need, and then how teachers can help their own students. So this was my experience. Create was great, and also having multiple sessions and working closely with the teachers and the coordinators help us to hopefully develop something that's going to be enduring, not for just a year.
Right, so that really sustained kind of relationship that is continuing is key. And
correct, because if it's going to be one time, it's just like having a conversation versus putting some questions in writing and ask the other party to answer them in writing. A conversation is dynamic, it's dialectic, it's going to correct itself. If I am misunderstood or the need is not completely understood by my community partner, there are chances to go back around and then go back and forth till it hits the target that both partners are going to be satisfied with their educational results. And I can tell you that the first couple of meetings, we were still trying to find the common ground and then see how we can help. And eventually, over time, we learned that there's a huge ground, and there's very much a good capacity to work with that. We just need to understand what schools have, what resources they have, what we can do at UCSD, how many people we can accommodate in UCSD if it's going to go back and forth. And like I said, this dialectic of going back and forth corrected us, put us in a direction that I'm hopeful is going to be fruitful for enhancing the STEM in our K-12 students around here.
Thanks. Thank you. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about this as well? You talked about not wanting to take a drop-in approach, and I think that ties a lot to this idea of developing relationships and collaborating with partners.
Yeah. Well, in particular, since I'm new, I mean, even if you're not new, you might not have established relationships with community partners. I'm really sensitive to that because I've worked with community partners in other contexts. And it's something that I'm building. And through this project and also a small Senate grant, I've been creating kind of asset mapping of who's doing what in San Diego. And that's been really helpful because that's partially what will be part of our class, is understanding what our food system is on and off campus and what people do about it. And over time, hopefully we can establish stronger networks with with partners off campus. But I do think it's also really relevant, as Matthew and Lisa point out, to work on campus. This is not a perfect place. There's a lot of issues in any arena on campus that we can work on. This is our own mini city with a lot of people, and it's only getting bigger and bigger. So I feel that it's also really relevant to work within campus. And as a faculty member, I'm working with staff, and it's really lovely to work with staff across campus. We have amazing staff all over campus. In dining and real estate, and people with amazing intentions that want to make things better on campus, in the planning department, with landscape architecture. I mean, I think I have more meetings with staff than I do with faculty in talking about our food system. And it's really wonderful to create that community that's not just like the academic silo. But a challenge for me with this class is how to talk about food systems in 10 weeks. It's like infinite. And so I had a research, these funds helped pay for a research assistant, a really incredible student who comes from a family of farm workers in the Central Valley, who has also gone to chef school, and she's a non-traditional student. She's transferred, she's older, she's just really tremendous. And her relationship with food and the food system is very different than mine. Being, when I say, oh, we should all be growing our food, that's so great, which I don't say. I mean, I haven't said that for a long time, but there is a lot of that in thinking about how to improve our food systems is local food and people growing food. And she comes from a family who harvests the food in our supermarket. It is not glamorous. There's nothing about it that's glamorous for her. It's backbreaking. And so there's a lot of nuances when we talk about something as personal as food that I think that I took for granted before designing the class, and understanding that everyone is going to be coming from a very, very different place. I'm so excited to do cooking. And then I think, oh, but a lot of people have different dietary restrictions. Like I need to do something that's really inclusive with cooking and, and then I have to think about, well, how's my funding going to work? So if I do this, the idea is I have this class every single year. And so I want to make sure with community partners also, I mean, this has come up always in our talks with each other fellows as well, faculty fellows. How do I have a sustainable model so that it's not exploitative? If I go visit a place, usually there's a donation or some sort of, funding for them to take time to give us a tour, or to bring them in to be a speaker, pay for their transportation. And these are kind of funds that I'll be using every year. So there's some challenges in these courses, not just the time, but also the funds that go into them and how to keep that going over time. I was thinking of teaching it every other year, but I really want to teach it every year. I don't want to wait every other year to teach it. But some of the courses I'm hearing about sounds like it would be a lot to teach every year because they're so incredibly expansive. And so anyway, yeah, I mean, there's several challenges in there that I'm still working out.
Thanks. Lisa or Matthew, do you want to jump in and talk about work you did with partners?
Lisa, do you want me to say something about this? Okay, so with the program, when we were putting together the course, through the conversations with a variety of partners and speakers, and an amazing kind of connection formed with Camp Hill community in Santa Cruz. And so it was through that conversation that led to, well, what if you came up here? And so once we started to talk about this idea of bringing students to Camp Hill, well, Camp Hill, there's not a boss that decides these things. It has to go to the entire community. The community has to have a conversation. The community has to make a decision. And then it comes relays back. And basically the community says, we are inviting you up. Because once we go to Camp Hill, besides getting COVID tested every single day, because we're in people's homes, it's not like a big institution. It's all built around homes where you're going to where people live. So we had to kind of overcome that, but it was always, everything that happened was at the behest of the community. So the community would tell us what we're going to be doing that day. The community would tell us, the work that our students were going to do. And then with the other partner that we had with Common Roots Farm, the students are going to get dirty. So Amy was talking about farming. In both cases, we're doing environmental activity. We're getting our hands wet. We're getting our hands dirty. Oh, and wet sometimes, depending on what we're doing. So it was like, it's all hands-on working together, but everything is always at the behest of the community, so that we're in charge of nothing. We're working in collaboratively, in partnership, and it is amazing. So that, in terms of what happens next, it's all by invitation. Will they invite us back up? And of course, Camp Hill has said, we want you to come back up. So it's quite, heartwarming in the end when they're like, yeah, when you're done, and they're like, we'd like you to come back. Can you come back next summer? You're like, oh, I can't. We have an issue this summer, but we're going to come back the following summer. So the work continues, but it's always just being sensitive to the community. We're working with them, and there's no power. It's really a collaboration, kind of this beautiful integration of just souls working together and understanding.
I want to add to that, part of the thing we cover in the class is the history of institutionalization of people with disabilities, particularly intellectual disabilities. So when we found Camp Hill and reached out to them, it was very intentional around wanting to find a community that even isn't simply a group home. There's a connection between people who identify as non-disabled and people with disabilities living together in an intentional community. So we really wanted it gave us a chance in the class to introduce these different, look back, not that far, where we want to hide anyone who doesn't present as this kind of neurotypical able person, and to show them that there are these other models that can be co-created, that any of us can create. And so that, I think that also showed the students, that at least the ones in the class, who not of all whom were able to do the summer thing, of course, but they actually they were very generous when they zoomed into class and we recorded. They had all sorts of members of the community and they gave a virtual tour. I mean, it was really, I think they were very excited to have a university level class be so interested in how they're organized, how they work as a group, how they keep themselves safe and also have a certain level of freedom in those communities. So that was really helpful to us.
So I'd like to shift gears a little bit, although it's not a drastic shift because you've all started touching on this a bit, and ask you about the learning community and the fellowship itself. And can you share a little bit about your experience with engaging with this fellowship and how it's impacted you and what the benefits have been for you? I'll let you jump in as you feel drawn to do so.
I'll just start really quickly. So one of the great benefits for me is that I didn't have the language to talk about this kind of, I didn't know community engaged learning, change making. A lot of the language that's used, I used a different language. I was coming from a different country, a different context, and how we talked about this kind of education. So I've kind of created a language around this through my interactions with peers. And it's so great to feel like I'm not alone in the struggles. I saw Lillian, your comment about funding, that's basically come up in every single one of our meetings. And it's just an amazing group of peers. We had such a great time in our meetings. And I realized that this was actually a thing, and that I'm not alone in wanting to do this thing, and I'm not alone in the struggles I have to do this thing, because everyone else here is also struggling with these things, and we're working on totally different projects. And for me, coming to UCSD in a pandemic, not only is it hard to meet faculty in other departments here generally, it was like, I don't meet anybody anywhere. And so it was just so awesome to have my first year have these interactive sessions, even though they're online. It just felt like a really warm and welcoming community through the Changemaker Institute and the learning. And I can't even get all the commons and and the faculty, and all just kind of being together and talking about our dreams and plans for our projects, and putting using a common language for it, I think was really powerful.
I'll jump in. I agree that the connections with other faculty, I already mentioned that, are really important. And I also felt, I'll say very transparently that many times I don't feel like necessarily supported in my sense of purpose on this campus by the larger, being in the arts, being centered in a disability research. And I felt like it was a very purpose-driven group, our cohort, and it was really inspiring, even though we have completely different interests and backgrounds, to hear that we shared this same sense of purpose, and we all really want the campus as a whole to have change making and community engaged learning be more, instead of like a separate thing, to be like part of everything we do. And that felt like a big shift for me. I've just started my 19th year, and when I started, there was no Teaching and Learning Commons. I've been a part of service there since before it existed. So to see the shift to teaching and empowering faculty, even in small increments, has been really important for me in terms of my own sense of morale and belonging and connection to the larger campus.
Just to add, certainly agree everything just Lisa and Amy had said. And what's really neat too is, for me, is like to see, Maziar and others that are all these like different departments, and Amy, like everyone could just focus on their research, and when you have people in change making, in the change maker side of things, it's like, okay, Maziar's working with high schools, it's like, it's just to be able to get off the island, to make these critical links between what we're doing and the community beyond the island that we're on in academia. I just think is just, I'm just so moved by that, the value of every discipline to be able to reach beyond, outside of the journals and all the normal things that CAP reviews us for doing, is really to value the service commitment side of what we can do. And then the other thing I want to say too is, I love that for many of the projects, they're works in progress. They're not like you got it all and it's like, now we're just going to drop the solution. And it's like, no, this itself becomes a learning experience, even as we're trying to advance and make things move in a more positive, inclusive direction. We're learning along the way, and our colleagues kind of help us with the questions that come up, or listening to about how they're describing their project or what they're doing with assessment or the challenges. That was very, very helpful.
So for me, I would say it's pretty much in line with what Amy, Lisa, and Matthew said. The interaction among the cohort, the conversations, especially coming from the engineering school. I think I was the only person from JSOE. It was very enriching for me because there were different perspectives, fresh perspective. And that made me to think about general education and learning deeper than just going to my classes and get back. And particularly about the fast pace of STEM and how we can actually keep up with that in education and do the outreach to make sure that the future of the workload in STEM is pretty much trained and then motivated to do that. That helped me a lot, thinking about how you can do the outreach, the strategies that was offered, the teachers pretty much pitfalls that could happen, that would happen in one of the seminars during this program was very helpful for me. And conversations with the community partner definitely broadened my horizons, because my views of how we are doing this general STEM education, what is the purpose, etc., was a little bit more too focused, I would say. And that conversation that, okay, how it's being started in secondary education as opposed to higher education, and just getting feedback on that over and over from the physics teacher, from different people who are working on that, was very helpful for me, generally, not for my only teaching, also for my research, because you keep thinking of what would be the end goal here and how you can actually have something that is beneficial for a larger number of the people and audience. It is still affecting my work in different way. I want to think that it actually provided some tools for me to become a better teacher, wherever I am, and also think a little bit more globally and broader in terms of who are my audience and how I can help them.
Thanks so much for that. Got about 10 minutes left. I want to invite, I have a couple more questions I can go through with our panelists, but also want to invite folks in the audience have questions. You can throw them out or pop them into chat here as well. But while we think about that, I'd love to hear, some of you started touching on this a little bit, but what are some of the future plans for your projects? I've heard a little bit about continuing courses, but anything that you haven't touched on that you want to share?
I can go first while my colleagues are thinking about their work. So the program that we wanted to do, Design for Launch, was never a one-stage program to begin with. So it's very much an ongoing work. And the quick answer to that question is we want to expand it first and foremost. We just want to see if we can provide more people who are going to take the ownership and agency of that, and then just taking it from one person and the grad student that is working with that faculty to a larger number of the people who are interested to do that. And hopefully it becomes a long-lasting connection between the Sandia district and the UCSD, something that we definitely can use, especially for the STEM education input here. We also were thinking about basically making this entire experience on a digital platform for the access of the people who otherwise cannot do it in person, basically see how it's going to work out, for people to run their design if they have access to any kind of 3D printing, or they can send it for 3D printing, send their design with all the modules that we are thinking about, and then based on the digital platform, we can run their tests and see if it's going to make it through the, launch to low Earth orbit, or what could be different things that they can do to make their design better. Hopefully on a broader aspect is going to make them interested and show them what is the actual spirit of engineering design, as opposed to dry equation and me talking at people on the board. So that was our hope and our vision.
Well, our project just continues. It continues with the courses that we're teaching. It's continuing with the summer programs, although there's always a challenge with the summer programs, funding. How do you keep the cost as low as possible and still manage to cover all the things one needs to cover for that sort of thing? So those are always challenges. So the funding, it's just, we can just constantly, we can have a whole session about woes about funding and the challenges of that, but we push on, the show's not going to stop, and we have to continue. So Lisa and I Lisa, you should share about some of the amazing things that you're doing. You haven't even touched into some of the other elements that you're working on with some, I'll say nothing.
For me, I've been able to fold some of our work and research into some outside work, with everything from like a large corporation to an ongoing project that I had in China with Yo-Yo Ma, who's very much considers himself activist advocate person. And sadly, that program, we were there in January of 2020 and it hasn't resumed, and I don't think that it will. But I have been able to do some presentations and sharing that's definitely been formed from a lot of the resources that we've had. I mean, one of the questions I asked myself is, when we teach this class in 2024, Crip Camp, the documentary that Matthew mentioned, is being made into a Broadway musical. I'm sure Jim Lebrecht would love to come to campus, but if we have an isolated incident, opportunity, not an incident, but an opportunity like that, how do we convince the campus that it's worthwhile funding that if we're not actually a fellow at that time? So I think some of this, as I think of moving forward with our work, it is related to resources, and is there a space somewhere, whether it's the Commons or I don't know where it is, where you can actually go and say, I have this amazing opportunity to have this person be on campus for a day. How do we fund that and make sure like there is this those cross opportunities are identified? Because it remains so difficult to be like, oh, there's a researcher in psychology, or there's somebody over here who would really benefit from our classes meeting together or something like that. And I think those opportunities are so hard to identify on a really large campus. So I think I'm going to continue thinking about where those are, and even how to use academic Senate grants, which Matthew and I have done. Our 2014 project, we had an academic Senate grant for that, but how to leverage those resources to also kind of fuel the Changemaker projects as they continue beyond the fellowship.
Carolyn, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I wanted to take advantage of having so many of you here, fellows here, and ask a question that might help us. So when we initially designed the learning community, one of our goals was it was initially a 2-year. Now we brought it down to 1 year because it's been really difficult to try to keep people engaged during that second year while also starting another cohort, because this is just such a high touch program. But one of the goals that we had was to try to gather resources from faculty who were doing this work to put on a website to offer to other faculty. So whether it was classroom activities that helped you build community with your students, or information about how to establish strong partnerships with community members, anything related to community engaged learning. And we've kind of fallen short with that goal, I think, just because it's been difficult to know how to best outreach to faculty and getting that information. And so I guess that's my question. How can we tap into the wealth of knowledge and information that you all have in establishing these community engaged learning courses, and build that into something that, again, it could be on a website on the Teaching and Learning Commons that's available to other faculty. And I think that's going to be even more critical with the establishment of 8th College, where there are a lot of faculty who are interested in doing these kinds of things, but maybe just don't know where to start, or don't know what resources are available.
Can I just say something related to that? Because I think it's not just resources like in content, but financial resources. And in my department, I mean, some of you know that in urban studies and planning, almost everyone has been one of these fellows. It's kind of funny. We have a very small department, but we also have a lot of people doing community engaged learning. And we just had we're talking about this in our faculty meeting, like, how do we fund this ongoing? And I said, we should ask Audra. That was my answer. So, because I think we need resources, even if it's, $250, $500, for a course, small pots of money that people can apply for these kinds of courses. That's not like a 10,000 Changemaker, but smaller. And that, I think there's some low hanging fruit there that could be really helpful for people to have these kinds of courses ongoing. It's making the plug.
And Carolyn, but that idea you had about just trying to collect some of this knowledge and organizing it on a website, to me is really valuable, because at some point we'll all be gone. Either we're retired, we go to a different institution, we just, we're done, whatever. But that you'd have this just place that faculty, maybe you have to organize it. Is it about a class, a community organization? What is the kind of activity that somebody's doing? But I love the idea, and maybe that could be part of the obligation of the grant, is that everybody contributes some, modest something. You have to kind of tailor what is that thing that you want us to share. But I like the idea, because then we could all be kind of perusing that. Or if somebody reaches out with an idea and they don't know Maziar, okay, well, let's just take a look at the website. Oh, wow, this is interesting. And now, I could reach out to this faculty member because I see it there. So I do like that idea, and that could be part of the obligations that we have to fulfill as Changemaker faculty fellows.
Thanks, Matthew. I wanted to mention something about funding really quickly too. The funding comes from the Teaching and Learning Commons Engage Teaching Hub budget, and we have $60,000 just for faculty fellows in general. And at the time when we first started this program, we hadn't really had any kind of established faculty fellows program. So this was the first one that we started. And now we also have the Anti-Racist Pedagogy Learning Community, which the Changemaker Institute is also supporting. And so I love the idea of thinking about how we can do fundraising for additional grant money that perhaps isn't as large as a $10,000 grant, but as you mentioned, Amy, smaller amounts that help those who have been doing this work be able to continue to do the work. And just a quick plug, we are going to be putting out the call for proposals, which Trisha mentioned. And so we're hoping to definitely reach out to all of you to help us expand our reach and get the word out to folks.
Well, we are right at 3 o'clock, and so I think that plug is a good spot for us to wrap things up. But Amy, Lisa, Matthew, and Maziar, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be here and share your experience with us. I never cease to be inspired by the work that you all are doing. So thank you. And thanks to all who attended, and please help us spread the word to your colleagues who, yourselves or your colleagues who might be interested in applying for this fellowship in the coming.
Thank you so much, Richard. Just want to mention really quick thing. I also want to give a shout out to our partner at UCSD, because we work with them as well as the partner outside. In my particular case, the Clark Center for Human Imagination and Sanford Cell Institute, they were absolutely phenomenal in their help and facilitating this. We were working on a very fundamental research, but at the same time, they were very helpful and understanding of STEM outreach.
Thanks, Maziar.